All right, let's get started, and thank you all for being here. My name is Bill Joyner. I don't know if any of you know me. I know some of you, and I think that's great. When we moved here in 1959, my mother went out to California to visit her parents to tell her parents that our family from Decatur, Georgia, was going to move to Michigan. Now, Mom and Dad had lived with Bob and I, my brother, in North Carolina and Georgia. So when she went to California, Dad took us to Howard Johnson's. Some of you remember Howard. We used to have one in Livonia on Plymouth Road. And that was the first restaurant we ate at when we got here. But so we sat down there and Dad said, "You're going to enjoy Michigan because you have to go." Now remember, at that time I was 10 years old. He said, "You have to go south of Livonia to get to Canada." Now, I didn't understand that. And then he said there's going to be things called ice and snow. I had never seen ice in winter, and I had never seen snow. And then he said, and they play a game called hockey. Now, back then, Atlanta did not have a hockey team. So I went down to the babysitter in our neighborhood, who was a few years older than me at 10. I think he was 15 or 16. And he had to explain to me what hockey was. So we moved up here. In 1959, we moved in December of that year. And lo and behold, Livonia had about 1950 had about 17,000 people, but it was approaching 50,000 when we moved here. And the maximum population we'd ever had was up to 110,000. I don't know if you remember. SIMCOG in 1962 projected Livonia to have a population of 165,000 people. We have 94,000 as our peak. That's probably not going to exceed that very much at all. So we moved into town, and the next thing I know, my mother is president of the Grant School PTA. I'm thinking they really were desperate. That's what I thought at the time, to have somebody that was just new in town becoming a part of that. And my first date when I was 15 was to take Cookie Secord on a walk from the state streets where I lived and she lived to Wonderland Shopping Center. And that was the big place. And it also was a part of what Mom and Dad said we were moving to Livonia for. Livonia had a downtown called Sheldon Center at Plymouth and Farmington Road. And all of the promotional material that Livonia put out had the picture on the cover of Sheldon Center shopping available in Livonia. And Plymouth Road was where we had our 4th of July parade from Sheldon all the way to Wonderland. And that's where the annual city festival carnival was at Sheldon Center. So when people today say we need 5 Mile and Farmington, which I happen to think we should have had, but at that time we were living in the most densely populated square mile in the entire city of Livonia, which was Rosedale. 10,000 people, just over 2,700 households in a neighborhood that people moved to Livonia for. We moved to the state streets because we couldn't afford the Rosedale Gardens, which the Sheldon Land Company in 1928 had decided that they wanted to build not in Detroit, but they wanted to build out in the suburbs. But something happened. In 1928, nobody was buying their houses. So what did they wind up doing? They said, we need a faith component at in that square mile. So they donated the property to Rosedale Gardens Presbyterian Church, which opened in 1930. And St. Michael's Church, which opened just a few years after that. So they now had a Catholic and a Presbyterian church in the most densely populated square mile. And just to show you, the other part is that at that point in time, we had 2 elementary schools in that square mile and a junior high school, and then Franklin High School opened 3 years after we moved in, which was just 1.25 miles down the road. Now, I happen to have enjoyed living in the state streets because at one time there were 43 children in school just on our street, Indiana. 43. Today, the last time I looked up, Indiana Street has 7 students on that same street. But that was a good mix because we had seniors and young people, and it was what Livonia was going to become known as, and as a part of where I'm going to take this narrative. And then we're going to get some questions from you. First of all, I don't know why you're here. If it was a Monday night for me, I think I'd be home, sitting down, safely ensconced in my reclining chair, watching TV from the weekend. But instead, I like coming out and meeting. Some of you I know, some of you I'm getting to see for the first time. But in 1950, when Jesse Ziegler led the drive along with Eddie Edgar, our ice rink, and Eddie Edgar eventually worked for the Observer newspaper as a columnist, but he was the first city councilman. Jesse Ziegler was our first mayor. But in 1955, the city council, at a closed-door meeting, back when they could have those things, said, we need to do something in Livonia. We need to draw more people in, and in order to do that, we need a hospital. So they sat down with the Felician sisters, who had purchased that big, beautiful half-square mile, and said, would you open a hospital for us? 4 years later, St. Mary Hospital opened, and that was the biggest thing because it drew people from all over to St. Mary's Hospital and therefore to Livonia. So that was the biggest movement in the 1950s, was a city council that took the initiative and decided that they wanted to meet with the Felicians and put together a hospital at where it is now. Let's see, that was 3 iterations ago. They're just like a bank. St. Mary's became Mercy, which became Trinity. And so now, if you find any recognition on the website, St. Mary's is really rarely mentioned at all. So we moved from the late 50s, and people used to fly in with their private planes to what we now call Wonderland Shopping Center, and that was an airport. And I remember Bud Alt, who owned the mobile station at Merriman and Plymouth Road, tells me that they used to go there all the time and take the cars and bring them in to have them fixed at their Alt mobile station. Well, the Ford Motor Company, which owned it across the street from their parts facility, tore it down. Shostak got involved and built a shopping center, Wonderland Shopping Center, which opened in 1963 eventually. My first date was walking there with Cookie and having our picture taken in one of those old booths where you sit in there and put a quarter in and I still have the picture. And every time I see her, I do not bring them out because I really like her husband, Bob. And I don't want them to remember that Cookie was the first person that she fell in love with back then. But something else was beginning to happen in Livonia, and that we made a transition to what I think, although I was not a fan, and I hope nobody here's a relative, Harvey Mulkey got elected as mayor, defeating Bill Brashear, who was a noted attorney in town, who served a term. Harvey Mulkey was elected as mayor, and the first thing he did was raid Dearborn, which made a substantial change for the future of Livonia that we have never, ever forgotten him for. One was he said, I want to bring in the best Parks and Recreation director. So he hired away from Dearborn John Dufour. If you've ever heard that name, he used to be a kicker with the Toronto Argonauts. And went to Dearborn as their director of their parks program, came to Livonia. 2 years after he was hired, he put a proposal on the ballot, and Livonia voted to purchase parkland enough for 65 parks, which makes Livonia have the largest number of parks in the state of Michigan outside of the city of Detroit and outside of state parks. So he is the one that we give credit as the grandfather of our parks system, John Dufour. The second person that he hired, he decided that we needed a good attorney in Livonia. This was one of 3 hires that he made that transformed Livonia from a rural community to the future. The second one was Harry Tadigan. If you're a walker and you go through any of our parks, there's a trail, the Harry Tadigan Trail, named after him 4 or 5 years ago, just before he passed. And Harry Tadigan came here and worked for Mulkey, McNamara, Kirksey, Bennett, Bob McCann, who served a short term as mayor between McNamara and Bennett. And so Harry Tadigan, who was singly responsible for so much that went on in this city, one of the first projects he had was when a bank said, we want to tear down the Wilson Barn and we want to put a bank on that corner. Anybody remember that? That controversy? Well, so Harry Tadigan got together with Bob Bennett, who was on the president of the council, Geraldine Joyner, who happens to be my mother, and Ed McNamara, and the three of them formed a coalition with the Livonia JCs, and at the time we called them the JCettes, because women and men could not cohabitate in the same organization. So the women, under the leadership of Sharon Brown, whose husband was on the city council, Sue Wozniak, whose husband Lynn was on the Schoolcraft College board, and Paula Joyner, who unfortunately was married to me. So the three of them collected in 30 days 5,000 signatures to save the Wilson Barn. And then a coalition, when that was happened, they decided at that time for a three-way land swap between the city, the bank, and the schools so that the Wilson Barn could stay there, right? Here's our director of the farmers market, and give her a round of applause. She's doing a great job. It's because of you that so many people are aware of the Wilson Barn, so thank you. Take the winter off, you deserve it. Don't tell them that, yes, you can have a festival in the middle of winter. We just need you to be rested for next year. So the Wilson Barn was saved, and just to the north of it was where the bank was built. Now it's a strip mall medical complex, and the schools. So that was one of the elements that Harry Tadigan brought. And the third one that he did, before I tell you who the third person was that had the other substantial change in Livonia, was that when Bob Bennett was mayor, the post office was going to leave Livonia. There was the post office on Middle Belt and 7 Mile. They closed it down. And Bennett met with them and said, you can't leave Livonia. We need you to stay here. So what did he do? He put Harry Tadigan to work. In order to keep money for Greenmead, they sold the property that Newburgh and between 7 and 8 Mile that the post office is at. That used to be part of Greenmead. And so they sold that to the post office, put that money in a trust fund so that the money could be earmarked. It took a change in all kinds of legal ramifications in order to get it done, but Harry Tadigan came up with it, and he and Bob Bennett moved forward with it. So we had John Dufour giving us parks, Harry Tadigan being the activist attorney that worked with our mayors to make things happen even when everybody said they can't. The third person, which I think is probably, nobody remembers him, Dan Andrew, was also in Dearborn. We raided from Orville Hubbard, all these three people. Dan Andrew was our director of economic development and planner. And what he did, several things, but first, he took that strip between Plymouth Road and Schoolcraft and said, that's going to be our industrial park. We're not going to have industry all over Livonia on every street corner. Well, guess what? We kept it right there, which solidified our neighborhoods, took the industrial out of our neighborhoods, and that was the first thing he did. The second thing, which I think is just absolutely phenomenal, he sat down with a good friend of Livonia who was the former Bentley High School principal who became the assistant superintendent for community community activities, community education. And that was Dr. Don Friedrichs. And anybody know Don Friedrichs? Okay, you do. Don Friedrichs said, in order to get young people in our community, young families to move in, we need to do something. And what we need to do is, we need a recreation center. So let's build a YMCA. And lo and behold, they appointed two people to chair it. They appointed Phil Power, who just 2 years earlier, 1 year earlier, had purchased the Observer newspaper from our then state senator, Chandler, and he had purchased it. So he became our co-chair for the Build a Y. And the other one was a Cy Young Award winner for the Detroit Tigers, Denny McClain. So the two of them held a fundraising dinner. They did all kinds of things. They raised enough money in coordination with the Metro Detroit YMCA and built the YMCA on Stark Road, long before anybody thought about our rec center. It boomed because it brought young families from all over into Livonia. Why? Well, we had a great recreation program with parkland and open space. We had new housing that covered the gambit of pricing, and we had a recreation hangout for families to get together with their children. So that was Dan Andrew and Don Friedrich, which also brings me to another element that people at that time, we had by 1970, we had 37,000 students in our schools. 36,000 and change. I like to round up, so if I do that, please, that's just me. It was more like 36,000 plus. In Livonia, we were building a classroom every day. It was just all over the city. We needed it. And now, of course, we've downsized. We only have 13 or 14,000 students in our schools, but we were the third largest in the state of Michigan. Detroit, Grand Rapids, and Livonia. So those were happening. So people were coming at that time because we had recreation, we had open space, we had housing stock, and we had a quality educational system that worked out tremendously to gravitate people to move in to Livonia. Something else was happening shortly after that in the 70s. They decided to build 275 and the Jeffries Freeway. And so what did that do? That put Livonia, that we were easily accessible from everywhere, so that no matter where you were in the state, you could drive into Livonia and drive out. So that was also a real asset. I didn't like the Jeffries being paved. I liked the boulevard. But then I'm 76, and I still like the big trees and 2 lanes down each side, not a freeway with all that we have now. But that's what Livonia needed, and that's what we did at the time. So we've continued to move along, and then all of a sudden, Bob Bennett at that time, Bob Bennett said we need a library. So the Central Library that we're in right now was put on the ballot. The people voted for it. There was a committee that met every week at Bob Bennett's house, and along with my mom and dad, who seemed like they were in the middle of everything. At that time, I was in Plymouth serving as a Wayne County commissioner, and I had moved out there. I built a house in Livonia because I thought this was my forever home. And then I'm out driving one Sunday, and I found a house in Plymouth. The next thing I know, I buy it, and 6 months later, I'm elected a Wayne County commissioner for 3 terms. If they had only known, they never would have elected me at that point, but I served 3 terms. Then I moved back as my parents got older, and I moved back to Livonia with no regrets at all. So Livonia built, we went from a hospital in the 50s, in the 60s with the hiring of 3 tremendous individuals. We moved into a library, and then what happened? Well, Jack Kirksey's decided we need a recreation center. So who was the #1 political campaign manager in the entire state of Michigan? Can you think of who that would be? Come on, Mike Duggan. So Mike Duggan at that time was still living in Livonia. So he became the chairman, the coordinator, and he's the one that put together the campaign that gave us the recreation center. Of course, then he went on and got elected as Wayne County prosecutor, and then, as we all know, mayor of Detroit. He ran the hospital, then the mayor of Detroit, and now he's off seeing if he can get elected. But he had his roots, along with his dad, Pat Duggan, who was a federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan to the federal judiciary, and his mother, Joan Duggan, who was at that time the assistant to the mayor of Livonia, Ed McNamara, which I worked for also for 2 years back in the early 1970s. In fact, it was John Dufour who saw me at a council meeting who came up and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I just graduated. I'm not doing anything." So the next morning I get a call. Lo and behold, he and the mayor invited me in, and he hired me as his administrative assistant for 2 years. Greatest experience I ever had. He did something that I wish that would happen today in Livonia, and that is, right after his election, he appointed the campaign manager for his opponent, Ray Tent, to the Recreation Department, head of the Recreation Commission, and he had run Harvey Mulkey's campaign when Ed McNamara beat him. And lo and behold, here he is, and I said, "Why in the world are you appointing a guy from the other side?" And he says, "If they are on my team, they can't work against me in the next election." And you know what? That philosophy worked perfect for Ed McNamara and Bob Bennett. And so that's a philosophy that they both had. And Ed, before he went on, became Wayne County, he lost for Wayne County Executive. And the day after he lost, Mike Duggan gave him a lengthy game plan how to win the next election. And so Duggan ran his campaign for county executive, and bingo, there Ed became a county executive. Most people don't even remember that at one time he was the lieutenant governor nominee with Sander Levin, who was a member of Congress, and he picked Ed McNamara to be his running mate. They fell just short to John Engler and did not there, but Ed went on to have a great life. So we've got the 50s, Wonderland Shopping Center built, we've got the hospital, we've got the parks in place, we've got our industrial belt, we've got our library and our recreation center. So everything seemed to be flowing along real smooth for our city of Livonia. But as it happened, our student population dropped and our age of Livonia increased. Now it's starting to go back down, so we're not at that age where we're not all 76 anymore. We're getting younger families that are still coming in, so our average age is dropping. Now, if you go through all of that, something creative was happening throughout Livonia that probably, in my estimation, started in 1946 when the Rotary Club was formed in Livonia. And at that point in time, think about it. We had no service clubs except for the Grange on Farmington Road at 5 Mile. But the Rotary Club was built, and one of the leaders was Dr. Maxwell Stewart, an OBGYN doctor, and he would come out every Saturday and Sunday with his truck and clear what we now call Rotary Park. So here's a doctor out there clear cutting and getting it fixed up so that we can have a wonderful Rotary Park. And the Rotary just continued with that, and that was a start of identifying organizations in town to join. And at one time, that to me was the genesis for our volunteer sector that built Livonia. So you had the Rotary Club that had at one time 200 members. You had the JCs, which had, when I was involved with them, not because of me, I can assure you of that, but when Jim Klein was president, we had 200 members in the JCs as well. We had an Optimist Club. I was in the Optimist Club. We probably never had more than 40 or 50, but we had fun. So volunteerism took over from day one and just kept moving through Livonia until something dramatic happened. We began to move away from asking our volunteers to do things, and we instead wound up asking the government and bureaucracy in Livonia to do everything. And as a result, our service clubs nationwide were dropping, but we were not encouraging our volunteers in Livonia as much. In fact, in 1971, 72 it was. I went to Chicago and wrote a federal grant. I got the assistance of David Ammerman, who was the principal at Franklin High School. We wrote a grant called the Livonia Office of Volunteer Energies, the Love Office. Joan Duggan wound up running it, and what it was a database of volunteers in the city, so that if you needed somebody to come out and cut your grass because you broke your leg, or if you needed somebody to come out and shovel your snow because you got a bad back, there was a database of over 1,000 Livonia people that wanted to volunteer, so that we could turn to this Livonia office, the Love Office, and we could get people to stand up and say, volunteerism made Livonia, volunteerism will continue the success of Livonia. And then, of course, over the years, that office began to move away as government. And I'm not going to tell you the responsibility of who may have done that, but the important thing was we moved away from wanting to organize volunteers together. And there was a time in Livonia's early days, our city council people all had their genesis in service clubs. They would go from Jerry Brown, Bob Bishop, would move up from where? They would start in the JCs, they'd join the Rotary, and then they'd get elected to the city council. But they had this basis upon which they could actually be involved in the city first, understand the neighborhoods, and understand what it was like for retail politics. They knew people. Ed McNamara used to call me up and say, Bill, I really want this done. Can you think you can go to the JCs and help them see the benefit of this? And I would go talk to the JCs. Or he would call Bob Bennett up and they would go talk to the Rotary Club. So that we had a coalition coming together over the years, all started in the 1940s in Livonia. We also had our first women's club started in the 1940s before we became a city in 1950. It was a women's book club based in Rosedale Gardens. And they met once a month and they read books and they talked. It was all women. They had probably 30 or 40 people. That was the genesis of it. We now have lots of book clubs in Livonia. In fact, I run one work with one. I don't run it. He started it. He just asked my help. Chuck Dardis and Alpha USA, 4 times a year we have a book club at the senior center, and it's kind of fun. So that's some of the genesis of where, I use that word too much, I don't like it. So that was probably the foundation upon which gave us the opportunity to be where we're at. But something dramatic happened this past year. Everybody was working together wonderfully for years and years and years until social media took over. And we will have found, and I don't care what side of the issues you were on, everything now, we lost our newspapers. We no longer have the Observer. We also had at one time the Livonia News, which was based in Redford. We had 2 newspapers in Livonia. Chandler owned it, became elected state senator, died right after he purchased it, and then his wife ran it and sold it to Phil Power. But they're gone. And I hate to say it, my little newsletter, Friday Musings, which is read by 3 times a week to just under 7,000 households, is about the only extent, and I feel sorry for people that take their news just from that. But I got off of Facebook personally 2 months ago. It's too negative. It's too, I don't like you. You know why? Because you're not wearing the glasses that I like. And they would put things like that. Now, I decided what pushed me over the edge was that somebody said to me on social media, why, you've spent too much time getting your boy on the wrong side of the issue. I'm thinking, my boy? Who is my boy? I didn't know what they were talking about. And then somebody posts, yeah, you were at the senator, what was the senator we went to in Royal Oak, Kathy? Bernie Sanders. I love to go hear public speakers. So I went to Bernie Sanders. I stayed in line for 2.5 hours. Now I have a real bad back. I'm wearing something on my back spine so that the pain doesn't last too long. And so I stayed there for over 2.5 hours in line. I came home and wrote that I didn't get in to see him. This person wrote and said, you have a direct line to Donald Trump. You left there and you called the mayor personally so that she could call Donald Trump and report on it. I'm thinking, people are believing this? So Livonia needs a newspaper. Nobody's ever going to get them again. And that is where we're at in terms of the growth of the city, that people rely on social media and disinformation, which if it had been there in the 1950s, we probably never would have had a hospital. Had it been there when we had the rec center, because there were people that didn't want a rec center because we had a YMCA, probably never would have built a YMCA. It would have been voted down. So the change in the atmosphere has happened. But now we've got two organizations that are growing by leaps and bounds. One is the Livonia Historical Society. They've gone in 15 months from 10 members to 110. And people are more interested in from where we came so that we can understand where we're going. The second group are the Friends of the Livonia. Anybody belong to the Friends of the Library? I see 2 nods. I see 3. I see 4. I'm 5. And think about that. How much money do you think the Friends of the Library have raised for this library over the 20-some years? $2 million. From their book sales, from their bookstore out here. I mean, when you think, and I just went over and bought, Kathy had turned, this is Kathy Ventatelli. She's my bodyguard. And better watch out. She is as vicious as they come. Look at those muscles on her arm. She's my bodyguard. And so she submitted a recipe from my mother, her icebox cookies. And so we went over Saturday to pick up the book, the recipe book. It's the Livonia, it's part of the Livonia 75 that's there in the bookstore. And I encourage you to get it. There's some great recipes in there from some, Laura Toy's got one, the mayor's got one, my mother has one. Marlene, did you put one in? Just say yes. Marlene put one in. That's great, even if she didn't. So there's where we're at in terms of some of the excitement that's happened to get us to where we're at right now. But let me ask, do you have any questions? Because I can go in another direction, which I will in just a second. Is there anything you'd like to know? Has this been worthwhile at all to any of you? You can tell me no. How many think this was a waste of your, oh, baloney. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm leaving this week for Colorado and to see my grandchildren for 2 weeks. And listen, this library has more to offer and more people in this town. We need to share it. And if you are on social media, please tell people why you like Livonia, why you like our library, why you like our recreational programs, and why we need a YMCA. Okay? Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Wonderful. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you very much.